I sense something's happening here in our community. I sense the Spirit is strong. I sense lives are being changed. I've heard of healings taking place, hearts mended, relationships formed. We're learning what it is to be Jesus to this world. And as we help others find the love of Jesus, his love finds us and he changes us. And this series we're going through just keeps rocking me. You know, be Jesus. And last Sunday we talked about Jesus on anger. And as we listened to his words, we discovered that when it comes to anger, all right, John, it's not clicking in. I'm not pushing it hard enough. There we go. It says we cannot be right with God until you are first right with us. You cannot be right with God until vertically. You cannot be right with him if your relationships with others are not what they need to be. So we need to make sure we're right with others so that we can be more open and available to what God wants to pour into our lives. And our challenge was to go out that week and to heal whatever relationship needed to be healed, to ask for forgiveness, to do whatever needed to be done to be right with others. And we talked about others being family members, friends, neighbors, but our spouses, especially in our home. And so as a follow-on to our message last week, we're going to talk about Jesus as he talks to the religious, law-abiding Jewish leaders about the harsh, person-destroying reality of adultery. Years ago when I was in seminary and just learning what it is to be a minister, we received a middle-of-the-night phone call. And you and I know if the phone ever rings in the middle of the night, it's never a good call. And so I reached over and grabbed the phone groggily and trying to pull myself together and answered the phone. And on the other end was a young woman, a friend of ours. We'll call her Jane. Jane's normally a very calm, nice, easygoing individual. But that night she was hysterical. It seemed as if almost she was losing her mind. She told us, and we know Jane because her and her husband, we were good friends in college. In fact, I was the groomsman at their wedding. And so we went way back. But as she told me, she said she had just found out that her husband, we'll call him Jim, was having an affair. That Jim had gotten a job at a major airlines and worked there in the managerial position, but he had taken an eye for one of the young female ticket agents there. And they'd gotten involved. And she didn't know about it for a long period of time, but she sensed things begin to change and something was a little bit different. Well, then it came out, and he wrote her a letter. See, back at we wrote letters, wrote her a letter describing all the sexual things he was doing with this other woman. And how he did not love Jane anymore. And how he loved this woman so much that he wanted to be with her instead. And she said, Scott, I don't know what to do. All I can think to do is get a divorce and leave him and take our children, 3 children, take our children and leave and go. Just wailing and crying. Wailing and crying. Man, I didn't know what to say. What can you say? And so I just listened. Oh, the betrayal of adultery. Oh, the sting when the one you have given your life to gives himself or herself to another. You know, adultery is defined as when a married person has sexual relationships with another adult who is either married or not married. You know, we have all kinds of names for it. We call it infidelity, cheating, being unfaithful, two-timing, having an affair. Whatever you want to call it, it's always the same, though. It's irrelevant what we call it. It always involves someone who is married being intimately involved with someone else who is not their spouse. And the reality is that adultery is, you know, fairly significant here in the United States. Believe it or not. Scott, say it's not so. Let me show you a few statistics. John, is my clicker not working the first time? The one thing we did not check. We checked everything this morning except this. All right. John's working on it back there. Okay, I'm going to read you some figures. 18%. About 18% of married couples experience infidelity. 50%. Up to 50% of all divorces in the United States are primarily caused by extramarital affairs. 7 years. For a woman who's engaged in adultery, said it's the 7 years the average married woman has her first affair, 7 years, first affair, 7 years into marriage, if they're going to have one. 37%. The majority of affairs start with friends, 37%, or people at work, 30%. 1 in 4. 1 in 4 partners use dating apps for infidelity. 40% engage in cyber sex. 37%. 37% of people, 1/3 in top management positions, engage in infidelity. 1 in 4. Most cheaters regret that act, but only 1 in 4 confess it. 300%. Cheaters are 300% more likely to cheat again in their next relationship. All right, let's put little names to the statistics here, okay? Hang on, here we go. Let's talk about some power players who have committed adultery we all know about. Jeff Bezos, Amazon. Bill Gates, Rudy Giuliani, Anthony Weiner, John Edwards, Amy Koch, Elliot Spitzer, Newt Gingrich, David Vitter, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and the list goes on and on and on. All right, let's talk about famous people now. Let's talk about people in Hollywood and famous. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kevin Hart, Mario Lopez, Kris Jenner, Meg Ryan, Tiger Woods, Jay-Z, Usher, Hugh Grant, and the list goes on and on and on. These are the names of women, men and women, who have failed to stay faithful to their wedding vows when they stood before the minister and they said to each other, you know, I take you to be my wedded wife, wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for rich, for poor, in sickness and in health, until what? Until death do us part. Isn't that right, Marshall? Till death do us part. Absolutely. Absolutely. But these are the 18%. But Jesus wants all of us to be part of the 82% of married couples who never commit adultery, who are faithful to each other and only to each other until death do them part. And because Jesus wants every married couple to be in that 82 percentile, today we're talking be Jesus when it comes to adultery. See, Jesus is not scared to deal with and talk about all the relevant subjects and topics in any time, in any day and age, even today in the United States of America. And so we have Jesus' words today, Matthew 5:27. Again, he says, you have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. He's talking to the religious leaders. He's talking to everyone in that space there. Do not commit this physical act of adultery. And you can see all, like every time, oh yeah, we agree, Jesus, you're right on 100%. And if he were to take a vote, all in favor, say aye, ayes all around the area there, everybody would have been in favor with that. And I think in our space here today, we would say the same thing. We would agree that the act of adultery, a married person having a relationship with another individual, not their spouse, is adultery. But just because they were not committing the physical act of adultery does not mean that they were not committing the act of adultery deep in their hearts. So Jesus challenges them, and he challenges us in order to help us to come to terms once again with our hearts. Because far more than just wanting to control our actions, Jesus wants to change our hearts, my heart and your heart. So he says, do not commit adultery. And then he begins to dig deep. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus is saying, but I tell you that adultery is more than just a physical thing. But I tell you that adultery is more than just a one-night stand thing. But I tell you that adultery is more than just two consenting adults thing. Jesus says, but I tell you that anyone who even looks at a woman lustfully, a man lustfully, has already committed adultery with him or her in their hearts. Notice, has already. You see, Jesus says that adultery is a thing even before adultery becomes a physical thing. And lusting after a man and woman, Jesus says, is just as wrong, hear this, is just as wrong as sleeping with them. Now, this is more than just seeing a pretty woman and thinking, wow, she's pretty, or seeing a dude and said, wow, he's a hunk, he's look good. You know. Now, I don't say that, okay? I don't do the hunk part, all right? But I don't do the other part either because I love my wife and I love my life. But that's not adultery. The first glance, it's not adultery. It's the second glance. It's the third glance. It's the rubber neck glance. As you think, you know what I'm talking about. As you're thinking thoughts you should not be thinking. And Jesus says, to look at a woman or a man lustfully is to look at him or her for the purpose of lusting for him or her. You see, they're using their visual presence as a means of fantasizing about them. This is adultery. And see, all the aspects of adultery other than the actual act itself are there. You know, the eyes are there. The attention is there. The thoughts are there. The desire's there. The only thing that is not there is the actual act of physical adultery. And the only thing that's missing is the opportunity. Because if all the senses are engaged, that means the heart is engaged. If the heart is engaged, it's looking for that opportunity to commit the physical act of adultery. Sort of like a thief. Thieves are always looking to steal. They're just looking for the opportunity that they know that they won't get caught. And then they steal. That's what Jesus calls adultery in the heart. Because in that person's heart, it is not caring, but actually using the other person as an object of their lust. Jesus says this is always wrong, even if the physical act of adultery has not yet taken place. Now, I want us to move back and get real on this moment, because this is not only true in the physical world, this is true in the virtual world as well. Right now, the greatest fear I have for my grandchildren is the accessibility of pornography, which they carry around with them on their cell phones. They don't have cell phones yet, and I hope they get them for a long time. It's always accessible. And every time a husband or wife looks at an X-rated photo or an X-rated video, they are committing adultery against their spouses in the worst sort of way. And there's no difference. Because the moment they log in and begin looking and scrolling to the pictures, and They're committing adultery with this person, these or persons, individuals they have never met, and they're committing adultery against their spouse they have said they would love and cherish till death do them part. So what do we do? Man, how do you address this kind of situation? Well, Jesus says we need to do some radical amputations. Now, hang on. We're going to get some strange stuff here. Hang on. Because even given the situation, Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. I want you to know, when I first heard this as a little guy, I got scared. I said, what is Jesus saying here? Man, what? Man, I was also intrigued by it. Gouge out your eye, throw it away, cut off your hands. But I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I could not, gouge out your right eye. What about your left eye? What about your ears or your nose? What if they cause you to sin? Gouge them out, cut them all off, take them and throw them all away? And then go and live the rest of your life mutilated and maimed? Cut off your right hand and throw it away. What about your left hand or your left knee or your ankles or your elbows or your little pinky toes? Well, what if they cause you to sin? Should you cut those off and throw them away and live a life severely handicapped? Is that the kind of good life, limbless life that Jesus desires for us? There's some strange stuff until you look at it closely, because what Jesus is doing here is he's messing with the Jewish religious leaders who were all about keeping the laws. Now watch this, because as we read it closely, you're going to understand what Jesus is saying. Notice, he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, and if your right hand causes you to sin. Now think of that. Do any of our eyes cause us to sin? I mean, is it like our eyes, they have like a mind of their own? They're both independent. They just go where they want to go when they want to go there. And so you're standing there, and then all of a sudden your eye picks up on this beautiful person on the right, and they say, wow, I'm going to dial in on this, and I'm going to just bring my human along with me, and they'll follow me over this way. Do our eyes have their own wills and control what they want to do? And what about our hands? What about our hands? It's like our hands, they're sort of out here. Oh, look at that dude. Look at his hair. I just want to run my fingers through it. Man, I want to go chase this guy down, and our hand takes off, and it pulls our body along with it. Now, do our eyes cause us to sin? Do our hands cause us to sin? No. They don't act independently of our hearts. Our eyes, our hands, every part of our body, each acts in obedience to our hearts. You see, the Jewish religions were all about following the law. And that's why this sounds so silly, because that's exactly what Jesus is calling them out on. You see, if in their minds to have the good life, the best life possible, is to keep from sinning. And what better way to keep from sinning than cut off and remove all the body parts that would cause you to sin? So take them all off, cut them all off, throw them away, gouge them out, and that way you can get into heaven mutilated and crippled, but at least you get it to heaven. But the problem Jesus is pointing out is that you can have a maimed body but still have a wicked heart. You see, that's the problem. The problem is not what you didn't do, but who you are. Eliminating body parts cannot and will not change who you are. Even if you dismembered yourself to the point that you cannot see, cannot commit any kind of sin, lust, any way, shape, or form, you can still be full of anger, full of contempt, even full of lust. Because Jesus lays it out this way in Mark. He says, for from within, out of men's hearts, now hear that, women's hearts, out of our hearts come what? Evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, evil, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from where? Inside, and make a man, a woman unclean. But over time, a heart that has been with Jesus, a heart that is changed by Jesus, will be able to do the things that Jesus does, because Jesus will have washed it clean of sin. See, we don't need amputated parts. No, we need Jesus to transform our hearts. Say that with me. We need Jesus to transform our hearts. The more we get into this, the more I realize how absolutely true this is. That's why Jesus came. He gave his life to change our hearts. We didn't hear from Jane for a long time. But then out of the blue, she called us back. And she said, Scott, I want you to know that Jim and I, we got so close to divorce, so close. We were right there. I was going to leave him. I didn't think anything could be done. But then she said, Jesus changed him. She said, Jesus changed him. And she said, Scott, Jim came crawling back to me on his hands and knees. And she said, this is not figuratively. He actually came back to me crawling literally on his hands and knees, begging for forgiveness, asking that she would forgive him, owning the pain that he had caused her and the hurt that he had caused her. He came back and asked if she would, in any way, shape, or form, consider taking him back. And she said, Scott, it took a lot of counseling. It took so much healing and a lot of time. But finally, she said, Scott, finally, I was able to forgive him. And now they have been married 44 years and counting. That's what Jesus does. He changes our hearts. He heals marriages, relationships. He changes lives. And Jesus' heart is changing us. That's what he came to do.